So today's readings are all about marriage. So I figured that the married man can come and preach for us. But Jesus himself was not married, right? And he gave us a model what marriage should look like. I have this close friend of mine, which I love dearly. She is in her second marriage. And I talked to her. We played together. We joked together. We were good friends. We know each other well. So I came one day and I approached her, talked to her. Hey, how's your marriage going? And she said to me, you know what? It's the same hell, just a different demon. And I kind of chuckled a little bit too. I laughed a little. And then I looked at her. And she was dead serious. And then I felt kind of bad. I was like, I did not mean to laugh at you. But I was like, I was perplexed of the sad reality that she had about marriage. This image that she had about marriage, it was just an image of hell. So she had suffered through her first marriage and now apparently going through the same type of suffering. And so I think that begs the question, what is marriage? In today's society, this topic of marriage is such a hot topic, is debated. People want to redefine it, and it's apparently it's up for grabs. But Jesus and then the scriptures, He leads us to what marriage should really be and what marriage is all about. See, I don't know if you noticed, but you and I are broken human beings. Broken human beings who are not perfect, who are limited, and who sometimes we just wake up in the morning and all of a sudden we're in a bad mood. And so sometimes when you marry, you bring that into your marriage, and so that creates friction, and then all of a sudden you're fighting, you're not loving and caring for one another. And we're broken human beings. And so when we're broken human beings, we need to turn to the Lord, the divine physician who comes in, helps you, heals you, so that you can be present to your spouse and be able to love that person. See, God did not give us a partner, or for those of you that are married, did not give you a partner to punish you or to make your life miserable. Right? Sorry, you laugh. I don't know what to think about that. So the partner is meant to be there for you, to strengthen you, to support you, to love you, to raise you up whenever there's a challenge and when there are difficult moments. In the gospel today, the Pharisees are trying to put Jesus into a corner by asking him about the divorce. See, they were not really interested in what Jesus had to say about marriage. They want to put him into a corner because they knew that Moses had allowed divorce. And so they knew that if Jesus says something against the idea of divorce, he would be in trouble with Herod, the Roman emperor, right? Because he himself was divorced and remarried. And so these Pharisees are trying to put Jesus into a corner so that the Romans take care of him and eliminate him because he has spoken against Herod. But Jesus goes directly to the law. He says, what does the law say? What does Moses say? And so he goes to the beginning, and Moses allowed divorce because of the hardness of the heart of males. Back in the day, females were treated like animals, or at most like slaves. And so whenever the relationship was not going well, males would oppress that relationship. And so Moses, so that he could protect the female in this case, he would allow the couple to dissolve and divorce. He would give them a bill of divorce. Not necessarily so that they go on and freely marry at will or remarry at will, but it was for the sake to protect the dignity of the female. And so Jesus is aware of that. And so he points at the beginning. He says at the beginning that was not the purpose. At the beginning when God created male and female, He created them to be united into a lifelong commitment, into a lifelong relationship so that they can be there for one another. God pulled the female out of the male's rib, not because one is better than the other, not because one is more important than the other, but because they're complementary. When they come and they're both physical and spiritual complementary, they come together and form this perfect union. And this physical union is meant to be what happens in the intimacy of their hearts and their spiritual bond between themselves and God Himself. So Jesus points to the beginning. And so what is this Christian marriage that Jesus is talking about? I think that we have to be aware that, first of all, no one forces us to marry, right? Marry is a freely desire. You choose to marry, and you bear the consequences. I mean, that's not it, but one chooses to freely marry. So one enters into this union freely, hoping to make it work. And so the marriage is not an exchange of property, that both of you come in and sign a contract, you do 50 and I do 50. Marriage is an exchange of persons, of hearts, of souls, where you put everything on the line for the other person, where you no longer think about yourself, but you think about the good and the happiness of the other. This marriage that Jesus is talking about from the first reading, he's talking about a complete sacrifice from ourselves, a complete vulnerability, a total self-donation to the other person. It requires that we forget about ourselves so that the other may live. It requires that we must die to our own ego, to our own pride, to our own selfishness, so that the other person can be at peace, can live and be together and be happy with me. And together in this mutual self-donation, then the infinite happiness and love from the Lord flows into your hearts, so that both of you can share it and be at peace and be happy. And then it doesn't mean that it's going to be a superficial happiness where everything is okay and there's not going to be no issues, no troubles. That's not what it is at all. Marriage, which I'm sure you've experienced, it's a long journey. It's an adventure that is good, it's joyful. It's got great moments of joy and peace and happiness. It also has moments of sadness, of darkness, moments of brokenness, of tears even. But it is in those moments of difficulty that both of you or the spouses are able to give each other in love, to support each other, to lift each other in those moments of difficulty. And sadly, in those moments, like instead of giving each other a hand, those moments become like opportunities to point fingers and to blame and to say words that are not uplifting and that put the other one down. And that's not what it is meant to be. It's meant to be a relationship where you lift each other, you love each other, you sacrifice for each other, you endure suffering for each other. Not for the sake of just suffering and being miserable, but for the sake of seeing your spouse happy and with a smile in their face. See, marriage requires two matured individuals who are radically in love with each other. Two radical male and females who are willing to give themselves totally, freely, fruitfully, completely to their spouse. And then in this total giving of themselves, where there is no restrictions between them, then life flows. And that is the gift of children. The children are not a burden to their families, are not meant to be a burden for you as spouses, but are gifts from God to you so that these children can come and fortify your marriage. And they can challenge you to give yourself in a whole radical way, in a whole different way that you ever did before. Unfortunately, this whole pattern of the hardness of our hearts that Moses had to deal back thousands of years ago continues to happen today. Our hearts are still hardened. We allowed selfishness, we allowed our own ego, our own pride to crawl into our lives, and that takes over our relationships. And so instead of thinking about ourselves as gifts for the other person, we become the receiver of gifts instead of giving ourselves totally to the other person. I think that as a society we've turned to, our couples, our marriages have turned to worldly things to support their marriage, to try to be happy and to try to stay strong. I think one of these fake things that the world has turned to is contraceptives. For example, when they first started, he gave this promise of being like the solution for your marriage. It's going to bring happiness, it's going to bring union, it's going to bring complete peace to your marriage. And we've seen that. Look at the results 40, 50 years from now. Divorces are as high as they've ever been. We have broken families, children growing alone, separate from their parents. And so this is what I mean when I say that we've turned. our hearts to be hardened as well, again, like in the past. The only way to really strengthen our marriages, to be strong, to be there for one another, is to turn to the Lord. Look at the cross. That is the perfect image of marriage. That cross, when Jesus himself offers himself totally for us, for you and me, so that we can have life, so that we can have peace, so that we can be redeemed. That is the image of marriage. And it's not meant to be that you bring your spouse and you yourself nail them on a cross. That's not it, right? I'm sure there'll be some volunteers here that, but no, that's not the point. The point is that you yourself offer yourself for your spouse, and you are willing to go up on the cross and die for your spouse. Sacrifice. Let the Lord reveal himself in your heart so that you are able to love and be there for one another. Because otherwise, we're just loving in a very superficial way. At the end of the day, marriage is about community. Marriage is about imitating this beautiful community of the Father, who is the giver, of the Son, who is the receiver, and the Holy Spirit, who binds both of them together. That is what marriage is meant to be. Between spouses who give and receive themselves, and this love that binds them together. Jesus is ever desperate to jump into our relationships, to come and help us and to be with us, to strengthen us, to teach us how to love, to teach us how to sacrifice for the other person. And Jesus himself is here today. He's coming to you in the Eucharist, hoping to help your marriage, hoping to lift you up, hoping to teach you how to love each other.